The morning sun was barely breaking through the mist when Jordan Price stepped outside his modern two-story home in Ridgecrest Estates, a neighborhood where every lawn was measured and every smile felt rehearsed. He inhaled the crisp air, ready to ride. Parked in his driveway gleamed his pride and joy, a limited-edition Ducati Panigale V4 Superleggera, one of only 500 in the world. To him, it wasn't just a bike. It was a symbol of everything he'd worked for: discipline, perseverance, and the sweet victory of breaking barriers that others thought he never could. But that morning, his breath froze mid-chest. The Ducati was gone. In its place lay a pile of twisted metal, shattered fairings, and a bright orange note stamped with HOA violation, unapproved vehicle storage. At first, Jordan thought it was a mistake, some cruel misunderstanding. He'd paid his HOA dues on time, followed every ridiculous rule about grass length and fence color. But as he examined the wreckage, his heart sank deeper. The tire tracks on his driveway didn't belong to him. They belonged to the HOA's own contracted towing company. And when he called, shaking with disbelief, they confirmed it with stunning casualness. Your motorcycle violated community appearance guidelines. We had it removed. Removed. They destroyed a $100,000 collector's bike because a group of board members, none of whom looked like him, decided it didn't fit the neighborhood aesthetic. Jordan stood silent as his neighbors peeked through their curtains, their whispers slicing the morning air. His fists trembled, not from anger, but from a knowledge that this wasn't about a motorcycle. It was about him, a successful black man who didn't fit into their picture of what belonged. What the HOA didn't know, what none of them could imagine, was that Jordan wasn't just another homeowner. He was a man who built his life on resilience, and he was about to turn their system inside out. Jordan Price had never been the kind of man to flaunt his success. Everything he owned had been earned through years of sweat, setbacks, and quiet determination. Born in Atlanta's South Side, he was raised by a single mother who worked double shifts just to keep the lights on. When other kids spent their weekends hanging out, Jordan was in his uncle's garage, learning how to rebuild engines from scrap. That's where his love for machines and his sense of discipline were born. By 34, he had become one of the most respected automotive engineers in the country. His designs for electric engines had been licensed by several major manufacturers, allowing him to build a comfortable life. When he moved into Ridgecrest Estates, a gated suburban community known for its manicured lawns and high standards, he thought he was buying peace. He wanted space to think, to work on his projects, to ride his Ducati down winding back roads at dawn. But from the first week, he noticed something unsettling beneath the surface of Ridgecrest perfection. The smiles were polite, yet brittle. The neighbors waved, but their eyes lingered too long on him, as though scanning for something wrong. The HOA president, a sharp-featured woman named Deborah Whitman, introduced herself at his welcome meeting with a tone that felt more like an inspection than a greeting. "We're so happy to have new residents," she'd said, eyes flicking over his car, his jeans, his skin. "Just remember, we like to keep everything uniform here." Jordan brushed it off at first. He was used to subtle condescension, the coded kind of bias that wrapped itself in smiles and bylaws. But soon the letters started coming. First, a warning about his non-conforming mailbox, though it was identical to the one across the street. Then, a citation for having his garage door open for too long, even though he'd been unloading groceries. Each letter came with a fine. Small amounts at first, almost laughable, but it was the pattern that gnawed at him. Still, Jordan stayed calm. He kept to himself, maintained his property better than anyone on the block, and paid every fine without protest. He'd seen this sort of neighborhood politics before, the kind where power wasn't about justice, but about control. What Deborah and her board didn't know was that Jordan wasn't an ordinary homeowner. Outside his engineering work, he was also a quiet investor, a man who understood systems, contracts, and the small print most people ignored. He'd built part of his fortune helping companies identify corruption in their procurement systems. And the more he read through the HOA's letters and bylaws, the more something felt off. Then came the Ducati incident. That bike had been his late father's dream. His dad had passed away before ever owning one, but Jordan swore he'd carry the dream forward. When he finally bought the Superleggera, a rare model only a handful of collectors in the world owned, it wasn't just a purchase. It was a tribute. Every curve, every engine hum carried his father's memory. Jordan had parked it in his driveway for just 2 nights. The HOA had no regulation against motorcycles, no clause against driveway parking for temporary storage. He'd checked the bylaws thoroughly. Yet somehow, the HOA had claimed the bike disrupted neighborhood aesthetics. The destruction of that Ducati wasn't just a loss of property. It was a violation of something sacred. That night, Jordan sat at his desk, staring at the photos he took of the wreckage. His mind wasn't clouded by rage, but sharpened by clarity. He'd dealt with corporate corruption before. He knew how to find weaknesses, how to dismantle systems that thought they were untouchable. He opened his laptop and began researching Ridgecrest Estates HOA, its board members, financial records, bylaws, and contractor relationships. What he found after a few hours sent a chill through him. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules unevenly, it was bleeding money. Thousands of dollars unaccounted for in maintenance contracts and legal expenses. The board had been paying a towing company owned by the HOA treasurer's brother. Several homeowners had been fined illegally. It was bigger than petty racism. It was systemic corruption disguised as order. Jordan leaned back in his chair, a slow, knowing smile forming on his face. They had destroyed his Ducati. But what they didn't realize was that they had just given him the perfect reason and the perfect leverage to expose everything they'd built their little kingdom on. And this time, he wouldn't just fight back. He'd bring the entire HOA to its knees. The following morning, Ridgecrest Estates woke to a new version of Jordan Price. Silent, composed, but with sharpness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. While the HOA board likely celebrated their latest victory, Jordan was already building his counterattack. Step by calculated step, he started with the paper trail. Every HOA in the country, by law, had to keep public financial records available to residents upon request. Deborah Whitman had likely assumed no one would ever bother asking. Most homeowners were too busy or too intimidated to question authority. But Jordan wasn't most homeowners. He submitted a written request for Ridgecrest's last 3 years of financial statements, contractor lists, and expense reports. The HOA's lawyer responded 2 days later with a smugly worded email, citing delays and processing time. Jordan expected that. He replied with a formal legal citation of the state's HOA transparency statute and CC'd the County Housing Commission. Within 48 hours, Deborah reluctantly delivered a flash drive containing everything. Jordan analyzed every file with an engineer's precision. What he found was staggering. The HOA had overcharged residents for landscape maintenance by nearly 300%. The vendor on record, Greenview Services, didn't even exist. A quick search revealed it was a shell company registered under the treasurer's wife's name. The towing firm that had destroyed his Ducati had been billing the HOA tens of thousands a year for compliance removals, even though there were fewer than 100 homes in the entire community. It was organized theft, masked as bureaucracy. But Jordan knew that corruption wasn't enough to destroy them. He needed to prove discrimination, to expose the racial bias underpinning every decision. So he started talking to neighbors. Carefully, discreetly. Many were reluctant at first, afraid of retaliation. But slowly, stories began to spill out. A retired Latino couple had been fined for painting their fence a color that didn't match community tones. A single black mother on the east side had been threatened with eviction over her kid's basketball hoop. A Korean-American family had been fined for non-standard landscaping, for planting flowers not on the HOA's approved list. Every incident had the same pattern. Minorities fined and harassed, while white homeowners with worse infractions went untouched. Jordan compiled it all into a spreadsheet: dates, letters, amounts, photographs, and statements. He was building an arsenal of truth. At the same time, he began subtly leaking small details to the HOA board through casual neighborly encounters. At a community gathering, he mentioned offhandedly how interesting it was that Greenview Services wasn't listed anywhere online. Deborah's expression tightened. The treasurer nearly choked on his drink. Jordan smiled politely and walked away. He wanted them nervous. People make mistakes when they're scared. That night, He sent anonymous tips to a local investigative journalist named Maya Porter, known for exposing suburban corruption and racial bias cases. He gave her enough to start digging, but not everything. Not yet. He wanted to see how the HOA would react when they realized someone was watching. Within a week, things began to shift. The HOA suddenly called an emergency meeting to discuss false rumors being circulated. Jordan attended, sitting silently in the back as Deborah's confident tone cracked under pressure. She accused certain residents of spreading lies about the board's integrity, but her words trembled. The tension in the room was palpable. Some homeowners began asking questions. Others, who'd suffered in silence, finally spoke up. And that was when Jordan knew his plan was working. The board was fracturing from the inside. After the meeting, he returned home and set the final phase in motion. He hired a forensic accountant, a friend from his corporate consulting days, to formally audit Ridgecrest's books. Together, they uncovered forged receipts, unauthorized transfers, and falsified votes used to re-elect Deborah's allies to the board. It wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. Jordan's calm demeanor hid a storm brewing beneath. He still hadn't forgotten the Ducati, the twisted metal, the humiliation, the quiet rage of watching something irreplaceable destroyed. But revenge, he reminded himself, was best served strategically. He didn't want a shouting match. He wanted to expose them so thoroughly that they'd never recover. A few days later, Jordan received a letter from the HOA. Another violation, this time for unapproved modifications to the exterior structure. They were retaliating, trying to intimidate him. He almost laughed. Instead of fighting it directly, he documented everything, dates, envelopes, and even fingerprints. He had learned that when corruption felt threatened, it always overplayed its hand. Then came the real turning point. One morning, as Jordan reviewed his notes, Maya Porter called him. She had gone public. Her article hit the local news with the headline, HOA under fire for racial discrimination and fraud. Residents speak out. The story exploded. Local TV crews showed up at Ridgecrest gates. Deborah Whitman's smug calm evaporated overnight. She tried to call an urgent board meeting, but half the members refused to attend. Some were already lawyering up. Jordan didn't gloat. Not yet. He knew this was only the beginning. The State Housing Commission soon launched a formal investigation. The police began looking into the fraudulent contracts. Subpoenas followed. The HOA board tried to blame each other, filing accusations left and right. Meanwhile, Jordan quietly compiled his evidence into a digital folder titled Rebuild Justice. Then, in an act that stunned the neighborhood, Deborah appeared at his doorstep. Her expression was brittle, her confidence gone. She mumbled something about miscommunication and wanted to make things right. Jordan listened without a word. When she finished, he simply said, "You destroyed more than a motorcycle, Ms. Whitman. You destroyed trust, and that's something you can't buy back." Then he closed the door. Inside, his heart was steady. He knew what came next. The investigations would tear Ridgecrest's leadership apart, but he wasn't finished. Jordan had a final move planned, one that would permanently dismantle the corrupt system that had targeted him and so many others. He wasn't just seeking justice anymore. He was building a new foundation, one where no one would have to endure what he did. The calm before the storm came on a quiet Thursday morning. Ridgecrest Estates, once a picture of serenity, now buzzed with the tension of a neighborhood on the verge of collapse. News vans lined the entrance gates. Residents whispered in driveways. Signs that once read, "Proudly maintained by Ridgecrest HOA," had been vandalized overnight, spray painted with the word corrupt in bold black letters. Jordan watched it all unfold from his office window, his expression unreadable. Months of meticulous effort had come to this moment. The story had gone statewide now. Maya Porter's second article exposed even more damning details: embezzlement, discrimination, forged signatures, illegal towing practices. It wasn't just bad press anymore. It was a criminal investigation. The County Housing Commission had sent auditors. Subpoenas were flying, and the HOA's once untouchable president, Deborah Whitman, was now under official review. But Jordan's plan went deeper than public exposure. He wanted to make sure this never happened again. to anyone. And to do that, he needed to take away the HOA's power entirely. He started by rallying the residents. Many of them, once silent or indifferent, were now furious. They'd realized how much money had been stolen from them under the guise of community fees. Jordan called an emergency homeowners meeting, this time without the HOA board. It was held on neutral ground, the community park that the board had long neglected. The turnout shocked everyone. Nearly every household came, elderly couples, young families, and even those who had once sided with the board. They were tired of being manipulated, tired of the threats, the fines, the hypocrisy. Jordan stood before them with a quiet authority that silenced the murmurs. He didn't raise his voice or dramatize the facts. He simply laid them out, numbers, documents, receipts, the truth. He showed them how the board had stolen over $400,000 in 3 years, how fines were selectively enforced, how minorities had been targeted. And then he proposed something radical, a complete dissolution of the Ridgecrest HOA. At first, there were gasps. People whispered that it couldn't be done, that the HOA was untouchable. But Jordan explained the legal pathway. How? Under state statute, if 2/3 of homeowners voted to dissolve the association and transfer management to an independent property firm, the HOA could be disbanded. All he needed was their signatures. By the end of that meeting, 78% of residents had signed. The next morning, Deborah received a notice, a petition for a dissolution backed by the majority of Ridgecrest estates. Her face turned pale as she read it. Without control of the homeowners, the HOA had no authority, no income, no power. The same system she'd used to dominate others was crumbling beneath her feet. But Deborah wasn't ready to give up. She tried one last desperate move, filing a defamation lawsuit against Jordan and Maya Porter, claiming they'd spread false accusations. It was a fatal mistake. During discovery, Jordan's lawyers, yes, he had lawyers now, submitted the full financial audit as evidence. What surfaced in court made headlines across the state. The treasurer's fraudulent contracts, the secret transfers, the internal emails between board members mocking minority residents and calling them undesirable homeowners. The courtroom went silent as those words were read aloud. Deborah's composure shattered. The judge dismissed her case immediately and referred the matter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. That evening, Jordan drove out to what remained of his Ducati. He had kept the wreckage in his garage, untouched, a reminder of how it all began. He ran his hand over the broken metal, not with sadness, but with a quiet sense of closure. A few days later, the state formally announced that Ridgecrest HOA was under criminal investigation for fraud and racial discrimination. Deborah and the treasurer were arrested. Their mugshots appeared on the same local station that once aired stories about Ridgecrest's pristine community. The neighborhood erupted in relief and chaos. Some homeowners celebrated. Others simply felt embarrassed to have been part of the illusion. But through it all, Jordan remained calm. He wasn't out for fame or revenge. He wanted restoration. He reached out to a reputable property management firm that specialized in transparent, non-biased community oversight. Together, they drafted a plan to replace the HOA with a resident-run council, democratic, fair, and accountable. Every resident would have a voice, not just a few drunk on power. When the final vote came through, Ridgecrest HOA officially ceased to exist. Jordan attended the last meeting only to watch the board's final announcement. Deborah wasn't there. She was under house arrest by then, but her seat at the head of the table sat empty. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. As he walked out, several residents stopped him to shake his hand. Some apologized. Others simply thanked him. The same people who once stared at him with suspicion now looked at him with gratitude. Outside, the afternoon sun bathed the neighborhood in a soft golden glow. The same place that once made him feel unwelcome now stood as a monument to accountability. Still, Jordan didn't smile, not yet, because he wasn't finished. There was one final move he'd been saving, one last act that would turn his personal pain into something bigger. He had already started working on a new nonprofit, Rebuild Justice, a legal fund dedicated to helping minorities fight discriminatory HOAs and housing associations across the country. The destruction of his Ducati had been the spark. But this was a fire that would burn far beyond Ridgecrest. And as the cameras from the evening news flickered on one last time, capturing him standing in front of his rebuilt garage, Jordan finally said what he'd been waiting months to say. They thought they destroyed my motorcycle, but all they really did was give me the drive to destroy their system. Months had passed since the Ridgecrest HOA's downfall, but the echoes of its collapse still lingered to the quiet streets. Where once there had been tension, there was now cautious peace. The neighborhood, once obsessed with control, was learning humility. The Ridgecrest sign at the entrance had been replaced, not with marble or gold letters, but a simple wooden board that read, Ridgecrest Community, home to all. It was Jordan's idea. No hierarchies, no enforcement squads, just people living side by side, accountable to one another. The house across the street now belonged to a young black couple who had moved in after reading about Jordan's case. They said it gave them courage to buy their first home. A few doors down, the Korean-American family that had been unfairly fined now grew flowers freely in their yard. The once rigid color palette of the neighborhood had been replaced by the colors of individuality. Blue doors, wild gardens, laughter echoing from porches. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. As for Deborah Whitman and the treasurer, justice had caught up. Both had been convicted of embezzlement and discriminatory practices under the state's housing code. They were sentenced to community service and banned from serving on any neighborhood association board again. Their downfall had become a warning to every HOA in the region, proof that the days of unchecked power were ending. Jordan didn't attend the sentencing hearing. He didn't need to. His victory was never about humiliation. It was about transformation. He had already moved on to something far greater. His nonprofit, Rebuild Justice, had exploded in popularity. Within 3 months, donations poured in from all over the country. Homeowners, civil rights groups, and even corporations eager to support housing equality. The organization's mission was simple: provide legal aid and advocacy to victims of HOA discrimination, especially minorities targeted through rule-based bias. Jordan spent long nights at his desk, reviewing cases from Texas, Florida, and California. Families fined for unapproved decorations, veterans penalized for flying flags, black homeowners harassed for improper vehicle parking. Different stories, same cruelty hiding behind paperwork. He built a small team of lawyers, social workers, and volunteers who shared his vision. The first major victory came when Rebuild Justice helped a disabled veteran win back his home after an HOA wrongfully seized it over unpaid dues. The man's tearful thanks reminded Jordan of why he started this in the first place. But behind every victory, the memory of the Ducati still lingered. Sometimes, late at night, Jordan would find himself in the garage where he'd kept the wreckage, those bent handlebars, that cracked carbon fiber frame. It had once represented anger and loss. Now it symbolized rebirth. One weekend, he decided to rebuild it, not to ride again, but to restore. Piece by piece, he worked on it like a meditation. Some parts were too damaged to reuse, but others shone with life once polished. When he finally finished, the bike stood not as a symbol of power or wealth, but as a monument to resilience. He placed it on a raised platform, encased in glass, with a small plaque beneath it that read, "Destroyed by hate, rebuilt by purpose." When news of that exhibit spread online, it went viral. Thousands of people shared the story, how one man turned his injustice into a movement for change. National outlets picked it up. Interviews followed. But Jordan never leaned into fame. He turned every question back to the message. Systemic injustice doesn't need violence to end. It needs exposure, courage, and accountability. A few months later, Maya Porter visited him for a follow-up interview. As cameras rolled his garage, she asked him a question that caught him off guard. "What did it cost you, Jordan, to win?" He looked at the Ducati for a long time before answering. "It cost me peace," he said softly. "But sometimes peace has to be broken for justice to exist. I lost a motorcycle, but I gained a mission, and I'll take that trade any day." The interview aired nationally. Within a week, Rebuild Justice's website crashed from overwhelming support. Thousands of homeowners sent messages, some sharing stories, others simply saying thank you. And then, One morning, Jordan received a letter in the mail, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a photo of a young boy standing next to his father, smiling proudly beside a Ducati just like his. The note read, "Because of you, they didn't take ours. Thank you for fighting for people you'll never meet." Jordan sat quietly, the words sinking in like sunlight through storm clouds. He realized then that what he had built wasn't just a foundation. It was a lifeline. His battle had inspired others to stand, to question, to protect what was theirs. The story of Ridgecrest Estates became a case study taught in law schools and community management seminars. Other states began passing stricter HOA accountability laws, many citing the Price case as precedent. Years later, when Jordan finally decided to leave Ridgecrest and move to a quieter coastal town, the entire community gathered for a farewell barbecue. There were no board members, no rules about fence heights or paint shades, just neighbors who'd learned what unity truly meant. As he looked around, Jordan realized that the neighborhood which once tried to erase his identity now stood as living proof of its strength. His fight had changed them all. Before leaving, he rode the rebuilt Ducati one last time. The engine purred beneath him, smooth and powerful. As he cruised down the open road, wind cutting across his face, he felt the weight of everything, pain, victory, legacy, lift into something lighter. He wasn't riding away from the past anymore. He was riding toward a future he helped shape,